Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Krown Gridiron Nation. There is Gord in Vancouver, Mike is in Toronto, and I am on Football Island with another edition of the 2-Minute Offense. A battle of two great Canadian receivers in this one. A.O. Manor with 61 yards, Tanner McLaughlin with 54 and a tutty in Arizona's 1-point win over Stanford. Wesley Bailey with a tackle and a sack and a TFL. Rene Conga with 3 tackles, but let's face it, Rutgers was outclassed by Michigan. Biggest day yet this season for Damien Alford from Montreal, Quebec. 135 yards receiving as Syracuse rolled over Army. Talk about domination, Ohio all over Bowling Green, and of course it was Curtis Rourke. 14-16 for 196. We'll talk a little bit about him later. UNC easily gets by Pitt, and that Pitt offense is stalling. Christian Vayu, or Vanier if you want to call him that, was called off the bench, did not have a good day. 7 of 18 for 85 yards, and he served up a couple of picks. Hey guys, it was a huge day for Damien Alford and Syracuse against Army. Does Alford compare to a Canadian receiver of the past like Josh Palmer, who slowly developed at Tennessee and ended up in the NFL, Gord?
Yeah, a heck of a game, or at least a heck of a second half for Damien Alford. 7 of his 9 receptions coming in the second half as Syracuse came alive after halftime. He goes for 9 receptions, 135 yards. That's probably the worst thing a Canadian's done to the U.S. Army since 1812. And Alford's been trending upwards over the last couple weeks. You know, as recently as a couple weeks ago, I seem to recall Mr. Hogan talking about how, you know, with Alford, it looked like he made the most of his opportunities, but it felt like he was kind of wanting for opportunities. Every time we saw him, we wanted more. That was reminiscent of Josh Palmer when he was at Tennessee, but with this recent trend of his targets picking up significantly, that changes things, because with Josh Palmer, it never really did. And he flashed enough that he was able to get his shot in the NFL anyway, but he was never really a heavily leaned on go-to guy for Tennessee. Alford appears to be becoming that for Syracuse. And with the Orange vaulting their way into a likely top 25 pole position this week and a tough game against Clemson coming up, the spotlight is squarely on Damien Alford right now.
And I'm really happy he stuck with it. I mean, we've seen other receivers kind of bounce around like a ping pong ball. Another tall receiver, Nick Martin comes to mind. And, he's always looked for that bigger opportunity. It never really has worked out for him. Alford last year, I think, got underutilized because they ran the ball so damn well at Syracuse. And, he's a guy 6'6". He's got that big target. And you're right, Gord, how many times did we sit here last year and go, man, why aren't they using him more? Well, the running game was good. So he stuck it out. Now they're utilizing him a little bit more. I'd like to see them do it on a more consistent basis. But the last 2 weeks, he's been, right there in terms of game planning. And I hope it goes forth this week.
Mike, on the downside, you mentioned him last week when we were talking about Canadian quarterbacks, Christian Vanier at Pitt. And that's a guy who's bounced one program over to another. He managed to get some time in off of the bench, and man, he did not look good. 2 interceptions and a 0.9 QBR, a definite setback for this kid.
Yeah, and it's too bad because, we all are aware of how highly touted he was when he came out of high school. And, this is the program where we pull for every Canadian kid to get to the next level. And, his progress continues to seemingly go in the wrong direction. Not the first kid we've seen that happen to, but there is something to be said for maybe looking at that lesser program to get reps as opposed to hoping that you get that kind of opportunity at a bigger program.
Yeah, I'm going to take it in a slightly different direction. I actually do think there's also positives to take from this for Christian Vayu, which is that he was the next guy up when Pitt finally got tired of Phil Jurkovec. And Phil Jurkovec and the rest of that Pitt offense, I should point out, has been pretty lousy to start the season. It's been a really rough start for Pitt. They are 1-3. Their only win against an FCS team, I think it was Wofford. Anytime they played an FBS team, they played what looks like a pretty mediocre Cincinnati team who got run out of the building by Oklahoma. They lost to them. They played what's probably going to be a pretty middle-of-the-road West Virginia team. They got beat by them in a rivalry game. And now, the scoreline probably flattered Pitt in this game against North Carolina. So It looks like it's maybe trending towards a rebuild for Pitt, and that actually bodes well for Christian Veilleux in the bigger picture of things. My only question being, is that offense too much of a mess for him to step in and experience any real success? Because it's been ugly so far this year on that side of the ball.
Well, we talked a little Damian Alford, but who else would join him in our Stateside 5? In at 5 from Stanford, Alec Aomanor with 5 receptions and 61 yards in a narrow 1-point loss to Arizona. Why did Stanford lose? Well, it's because of this guy on the other side of the field, Tanner McLaughlin. 2 receptions, 54 yards, and a touchdown for the tight end from Lethbridge, Alberta. In at 3, Colorado State's Noor Gotkuth. He had a pass defense, 7 tackles, 2 TFLs, and a sack. A monster day for the defensive lineman. Ohio wiped out Bowling Green, and Curtis Rourke was the guy pulling the trigger. 14 of 16 for 196 and 3 TDs. He added another 33 with his feet. And in at 1, he was an army of one. Damian Alford, 9 receptions, 135 yards as the Orange conquered Army. Stick around, everyone. We'll tell you how Canada was painted blue and gold. Welcome back to KGN, everyone. Canada, you told us you love this. You really did. It's the ultimate authority in Canadian college sports. Of course, I'm talking about the Power 7. In at 7, back into the 7, it is your Saskatchewan Huskies. They got a real test coming up this week as they host the undefeated UBC Thunderbirds. The Laurier Golden Hawks are in at 6. They are consistent and proficient and always a threat in the OUA. Number 5, why not? Because they are 5-0 for the first time since 1975. Those are your Windsor Lancers as they get ready to tee up a game against Western. Maybe the Laval Rouge-et-Or like to quietly clunk along at 4 because they always like to be number 1 when it comes to late November. A sudden appearance for the UBC Thunderbirds in the Power 7. 10,000 watching them roll over those Golden Bears from Alberta. You know why Montreal is number 2? Je me souviens them kicking Laval all over the field a couple of weeks ago. They are still the complete package. They are still the heritage brand. They are still the team with one heck of a quarterback in Evan Hellick. It is the Western Mustangs in at number 1. Okay, Mike, Windsor in at 5. Everybody loves Windsor these days. Do you think that's justified?
Why not? They're undefeated. They've beaten everybody who's come in front of them. But, you know, we didn't know if they were top of the OUA. We kind of had it, okay, before the season, Western's going to be 1, and then is it going to be Queens or Laurier, and then the next group who's going to step up? Well, essentially, Windsor's beaten everybody in the next group, and they beat Queens. So let's see what they can do. They're fun to watch, that's for sure. Maybe not if you like really, outlandishly offensive football, but they're really well coached. They're in position. They're very aggressive on defense, and I like it because not only do they deserve it for being 5-0, it's somebody different. And I like that. Whether we're talking about Alberta earlier in the season. Let's run with this thing and enjoy it for as long as it lasts. And if it does happen to go deep into the playoffs, even better.
So by special request of Mr. Randall, UBC is higher than Laval. We all ended up agreeing with him, though, on this because UBC took out the number 2 team from last week in our Power 7, which were the Alberta Golden Bears. And they did it in impressive fashion in front of about 10,000 people out at Thunderbird Stadium. What a great night for the UBC Thunderbirds, Gord. And this team looks like it's got a great future as well.
Yeah, it does. And this UBC squad has looked really strong on both sides of the ball as they've hit their stride the last couple weeks here. You know, they've weathered the injury to Jarrell Cummings on defense the last couple weeks fairly well. And on the offensive side of the ball, they are putting up fireworks. They are explosive. They can throw as effectively as anybody in the country. They can run probably better than anybody in the country right now. Isaiah Knight's playing as well as I've ever seen him. Garrett Rooker's playing as well as we've ever seen him. Sam Davenport has blossomed as a go-to receiver for them. And that offensive line, anchored by those 2 behemoth tackles, Gio Manu and Theo Benedet, are pushing people around up front, and they're keeping Rooker clean. It was really striking a couple weeks ago against Manitoba, the difference in the protection once Manu and Benedet left the game and their backup stepped in, because then it was back to kind of average protection, and it highlighted how locked in they were at keeping Rooker clean because he barely got touched all day. That bodes really well for UBC going into a huge test for them against the other team in that conversation at the top of the Canada West, Saskatchewan. So another reason why power rests in their hands is that they can control their own destiny as early as this weekend to really lock down the top seed in the Canada West.
I expected more of a full-throated defense of Windsor versus UBC in this Power 7, the 2 blue and gold teams from Mr. OUA himself, Mike Hogan. Where are you on this, Hoagie?
Not yet. Not for Windsor. I don't think they're there yet. You know, we talked about they have to beat somebody better than Queens, and that's no disrespect to Queens, who almost beat Western. But, you know, we saw the offense on the weekend from, you know, UBC against a pretty good Alberta team that we've talked about. They put, what was the total yardage? I think it was 666, which, you know, you can take that as an omen. But, you know, that's a hell of an offense, and Windsor's not there yet offensively. They're more like an anaconda-like defense, where they're just going to strangle life out of you. And anytime you give them something, they're going to take it. And there was an opportunity for UBC to falter in that game after they gave up the 95-yarder on the first series of the second half. And they got stronger and then just said, okay, enough is enough. And they left Alberta in the rearview mirror. So until Windsor shows that they're capable of that, I don't think they're in the category there yet. I think they're in the top 7, but I don't think they're top 2 or 3 yet.
But we don't want to jump ahead to games of the week, but we kind of do here, because this is a weekend that could really create a bit of a new order in U Sports football with the Windsor Western game and the Saskatchewan UBC game. Do you agree with that, Gord?
Yeah, I do agree with that. I think there's statement games awaiting in both parts of the country. And, you know, back to the power rankings, we put Western at the top, but it kind of feels like a legacy number 1 seed for Western more than their actual performance at this point in time. And I mean, let's not take anything away from them. They're undefeated. They've survived every test, but they have been tested just about every week. And that has not necessarily been the case for UBC, for example, who blew the doors off Manitoba, right? So I do think that there's the opportunity for Windsor to have a massive statement in Ontario. Westerns look vulnerable. I think there's an opportunity for UBC to make a massive statement out west, not because they haven't. I think they've looked better than Saskatchewan thus far this season on the whole. However, as we referenced on last week's program, going into Saskatoon has historically been a boneyard for a lot of Canada West programs. And for UBC, they're probably top of that list. They have struggled mightily to win in Saskatoon. So for them to overcome that hurdle here would be huge, because it also means they probably don't ever have to go back there this season.
Coming up next, we'll tell you how the Red Leafs have fallen. Welcome back, everyone. Well, we had lots of wonderful things to say about university and college football in Canada in our last couple of segments. I'm not sure if this is going to be so wonderful. The SFU report came in from the special reporter, and the news was not good. It was not good for football, but it was not good for the entire athletics department at SFU. In fact, it was embarrassing. There's a structural deficit there of about $1.2 million. Morale has never been lower. And the thing that I was surprised about was that there was no real strategic plan in place. So here they are making decisions on the future of a football program, and it's not really part of a strategy. I think the upshot of this is that if you're expecting football to come back there in 2024, definitely not. If it's 25, that's doubtful because there's such a mess there. They got to clean up. What does this mean, Gord?
Well, I wouldn't hold my breath on the football program ever coming back. And I hate to say that and be that guy. And I know I have consistently kind of been pretty pessimistic about the potential of this program making a return. But to this point, I've also been perfectly right on that. So it really was, like, embarrassing is the word to use. And I tend to overuse that word, but this truly was an embarrassment for a large-scale university that fancies itself an international institution. And in a conversation with a friend who has some connections within that department, like, that person raised the question, like, how much longer does the NCAA tolerate this, right? And that's a more than football question, obviously, because football's already been canned. But the rest of the athletic department has really struggled since going down to the NCAA. And it feels like they aren't prepared to change that, right? And if you compare them to their competition in the NCAA, like, I don't see any really good reason why a lot of their sports are going to all of a sudden turn the ship around. And so it's really negative. There's financial issues. There's organizational issues. There was pretty veteran leadership in charge of that department up until recently. And it's frankly quite shocking how poorly run the department appears to have been. And football just kind of was a symptom of the malady, if you will.
I know you guys are much closer geographically and emotionally to the problems that the school has gone through. But, when I sit back here in Ontario and kind of look from afar, I understand, the birth of the program, and Dr. Gordon Shrum had this great idea of, playing with the big boys, so to speak, down in the States. But that was in a time when the Canadian dollar was worth more than the American dollar. And I've never, ever understood this from a financial standpoint unless they were going to play teams specifically restricted to the Pacific Northwest. When they start flying into Texas and stuff, I just, why wouldn't you just stay up in Canada and play teams in your own country? I really never understood that. So for me, SFU's always been a real question mark about why they do what they do. And sadly, with this report, I don't think they know why they do what they do.
Gord, you're a local high school coach in the area. You know the impact of not having that school in Burnaby. If you look across the country right now, Nova Scotia has 3 university programs. Quebec has 6. Ontario has 11. Saskatchewan and Alberta have 2 each. BC has 1. BC has 1 now with UBC. I mean, we do have a healthy junior system here with 7 teams, but only 1 university team. What's it going to take to get another university team started here in BC, especially in Vancouver and the Lower Mainland?
Well, it's going to take a champion, right? And it's the same answer to that question when I'm asked about what it takes to start up new high school football programs. And I have done that myself, and I was the champion, and that's the only reason it got done. And it's not that I'm a superhuman to get it done. It's that I was willing to put in the sacrifice, the time, and the effort to do it. And I felt passionately enough about it that I was willing to do that. And that's going to be the toughest piece to find, because you can't even get off the ground if you don't have it. But as a guy who's an education advocate, like, you're right, Jim, we really do need to see a second university program in this province, maybe even a third. But in terms of opportunities, like, there are a number of universities out there that could theoretically hold a football program. The one at the top of the list for me is University of the Fraser Valley, which has had success in non-football sports in the Canada West pretty consistently in a few of them recently. And it's a growing area on the outskirts of Greater Vancouver. It's got campuses in both Abbotsford and Chilliwack, which combined are almost 1.5 million people right now. There's a lot of people there. So and continuing to grow. There's a powerhouse high school football programs in that backyard too. It feels like a perfect fit if somebody at that institution is willing to take charge on it. And that question holds for all of them. UBC Okanagan, another potential opportunity. Thompson Rivers, where the BC Lions hold training camp every year, another potential opportunity up in Kamloops. But again, who's gonna take the wheel and steer it in that direction? I just don't know who that person is.
Yeah, and I would not write off Trinity Western. They have a satellite campus in Bellingham, Washington. It might be attractive for kids in Northwest Washington that don't have an NCAA team to play some college football after high school. Before we go to break and games of the week, congratulations going out to Maya Turner of the Manitoba Bisons, the first female to score a point in a U Sports game. She's not a Canadian, though. She's from Minnesota. So Christy Elliott of SFU is the first Canadian woman to score in a college game 2 years ago. Welcome back again, everyone, to KGN. Let's go to our games of the week, and I will go to Mike first this week.
We'll start south of the border, and we talked about this game a little bit already, but Clemson and Syracuse. And, Clemson gave Florida State a go last week. They kept it close against one of the better teams in the country. And what I've liked about Clemson this year is how balanced their attack is. Like, they can run the ball exceptionally well when they need to or have to, and they can throw the ball when they need to or have to. And that makes a very difficult challenge for Syracuse, who hasn't really played anybody yet. We talked about Damian Alford, and I just love the fact, I'll piggyback on what we said in an earlier segment. This is a guy that we cried to get more touches to, and he's done it so far. He's leading the team in catches. He's leading the team in yardage, and he had 135 yards last week. So this is not going to be an easy game for Syracuse, and there's going to be a whole lot of orange on the field. But I'm just hoping that the Syracuse brand can give the Clemson brand of orange a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah, and in a week where there aren't necessarily a lot of standout matchups for Canadians, there was one that stood out for me, and it's a game that I want to watch just for the football game, and it just so happens to also have some Canadian content, two potential Canadians lining up across from each other, and that's LSU going into Oxford to play Ole Miss. Now, we talked about the left guard at Ole Miss, Jeremy James, on this program a couple weeks ago. He has continued to be pretty solid, although they had a tough setback against Alabama this past weekend. And meanwhile at LSU, we've got old friend Paris Shand, who's transferred from Arizona over to LSU. Now, that's a pretty significant step up in competition, so he hasn't necessarily been a key player for SFU, or for LSU, excuse me, but he is rotating in on that defensive line, and as a D tackle means he probably lines up against Jeremy James on certain snaps. So keep an eye out for that matchup if you're a big CanCon guy, and if you're not, just go watch the game, because it probably should be a good football game anyway.
And I feel like I should almost move to Windsor with the amount I've talked about the Lancers on this program so far this season, but they deserve it. And, it's kind of the shiny new object, but now we see how shiny it's going to be as it has to go and, take on the powerhouse in the OUA in Western. And, reports of their demise may be premature because Western is still doing a lot of things well. They're rushing for 250 yards a game. They're throwing for 3 1/4. They have a very good defense. So this is a big test for Windsor, who's, I think because of their lack of explosiveness on offense, are going to have to play nearly a perfect game in terms of don't turn the ball over, don't take penalties, which has been maybe the weakest part of Windsor this year. They've taken a lot of penalty yards this season, and be opportunistic. They pressure the quarterback exceptionally well. Those pressures, even if they don't get the sack, and they are leading the country in sacks, that's turned into some interceptions, and they also lead the country in interceptions. So if they can play really nice, solid defense this week, they'll have a chance. if it turns into a shootout, I don't think they have a hope in Hades of beating Western.
And on brand as ever, I'm going to take the top Canada West matchup this week, and we talked about it a little bit earlier on the show, but UBC goes into Saskatoon to play the Huskies. And what I find particularly intriguing about this matchup, obviously there's playoff ramifications, big seeding ramifications here for two of the real contenders in the Canada West. But what I find particularly intriguing is that UBC is firing on all cylinders right now. They are in top form. Sask hasn't really felt like they've been in top form over the last couple weeks. You know, it felt like maybe they were playing with their food a little bit this past week, but they, you know, Calgary gave them a competitive game, which can't be said for when UBC played Calgary. It can't be said for when UBC played Manitoba the week after. And I mean, frankly, looking at the final scoreline and the yardage disparity, it can't really be said for UBC beating Alberta this past weekend either. So UBC is in fine form, and under normal circumstances, they would be a significant underdog in this game, but the way that they're playing right now versus the way the Huskies are playing, the Huskies are going to have to really dig in and give them a game. They always do, but this is looking as good as possible for UBC going in here to finally get a W in Saskatoon, which has historically been very difficult for them to come by.
And I should mention the game we always mention on here this time of year, the Panda game. So Canada, let's get out to the game.